Okay, hey everybody. So I got my second COVID shot yesterday, and it hit a little harder than I expected. So, Haley, sorry, I have to break my promise to you. There's no OSO in this video, but I'll make it up to you with the next one. Everybody gets to see OSO for the exam 4 review, for sure. Um, I'm gonna post there's an older review from the class that I taught, I think last semester, um, where I had shaved off all of my hair. That's why I'm wearing a hat, if you're wondering. That's up, so watch that one. There are just some few things that are different, and I want to go over those, and then I'll go back to sleep, and then that'll be great. So the few things that are different, um, swallowing. This is all the same on the other video. Dysphagia means disordered swallow. And then all of this information is exactly the same as on the other video. Same thing with this. This is all the same. One thing that you might need to know is that in addition to someone who focuses on dysphagia working in the hospital or home health, about 50% of SLPs are working with swallowing in some way. So it's a huge area, really super important. So it would be good, to make sure that this is the kind of information that you retain for further on down the road, because it's likely that half of you are going to end up working with swallowing, and it's a growing field too. It's also true for voice disorders when we get there. That's also a growing field. A lot of SLPs are working in that too. Okay, so clinical methods, the first step is you're going to identify the problem. You have to identify the specifics of the problem. Remember, so if we're thinking about the kid who it looked like he had a stutter, we don't want to just say like, well, it looks like a stutter. We want to say he repeats speech sounds, the first speech sound of a longer word or an entire single syllable word. So we want to put down the specifics. The second step is expanding our knowledge about that and then coming up with a diagnosis. And after that, we're going to identify target goals. But remember, these are easily achievable target goals. There's something that's within reach, because then clinical methods are a cycle. So you're going to go back to the top and you're going to start over. You'll give new target goals and progress slowly, but hopefully effectively. Clinical methods are not locked in once they're decided, right? You can change. Your focus here is on the patient, not on the tools and processes that you've decided on. However, with research methods, the methods are locked in once they're decided, because the focus here is on figuring out, does this process or tool actually work? The only thing you need for a research question is that it's falsifiable. It's nice if it's feasible, but it doesn't have to be. The only requirement to do real science is that it's falsifiable, which means you could answer it with a yes or no statement. This is the same as in the other video, the IV, DV, and control. The IV is what you're changing. The DV is what you're measuring. And the control are any variables that you're holding constant. Anything that you think is going to screw up your data that you don't want to. So like, let's say age, if you're looking at like a new treatment for stuttering, you don't want to have 8-year-olds in one group and 12-year-olds in another. You want to hold everybody constant. You want to control age and only look at 8-year-olds. The optimal number of variables is as few as possible. It's hard for us to make sense of too many variables. So as few as possible for you to actually make your claim, which could be 2, it could be 3. But you definitely don't want to be up with 10, even though that's kind of the first instinct that we all have when we do a study is, oh man, there's all these factors that could be related. That's true. But you gotta hold the enthusiasm back. The goal, whoop. Oh. I don't have an answer for that one. The goal of science is to find objective truths. It's all that science is doing. We want to find truth, right? So we test things with really methodically, and we can come up with yes or no answers. And really, the scientific method is the only way to do that, to find real objective truths. Like, we can logic stuff out, we can deduce things, but you're not always right when you just use logic, or when you use deductive reasoning, or when you just have a hypothesis from experience. You have to do really well-controlled studies to find real objective truths, and it actually helps somebody. Okay. A person does better the second time they take a test or run an obstacle course. This is because of the practice effect. But maybe you get tired when you take 2 GREs in a row. This is because of the fatigue effect. So at the top, when I say the second time you take a test or run an obstacle course, I don't mean like right after, like not in a row. It could be you run a course once and then you come back the next day and you do it again. Or you take a math test and you come back in a week from then and do it again. That's the practice effect. But doing things like successively in a row, boom, 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 this will be the fatigue effect. You'll get tired and do worse. You can account for these by counterbalancing. Well, you can account for the practice effect by counterbalancing. That's actually, you know what? I am missing a statement in there. These are not easily accounted for by counterbalancing. This is a bad. I'm missing a thing. See, this is the problem when I'm tired. I can't do these things. So, in your notes, right here, can I write on this? Yes. Okay. In your notes right here, these are separate. Also, the broccoli question, I'll explain later. So, these are accounted for by AAX. Oh man, bad handwriting. B designs, right? So what you're doing is you're looking at what's the practice effect from like 2 pretests. So 1 pretest to the next pretest. What is the practice effect? And then 1 post-test to the next post-test. What is the practice effect there? So you can imagine that if you had something like, here's point 1 to point 2, and you do your intervention, and then point 3 to point 4. So there's a slope here. That's a practice effect. There's a slope here. That's a practice effect. So you can remove that slope from this, but this still has quite a slope, and that's the actual effect of your training, like your method to get rid of stuttering or whatever, is right here. Fatigue effect, of course, you're going to give some space, but you'll also do an AAXBB design. You would just expect that instead of going up because of a practice effect, they might go down. And then you might see a level thing like this for your treatment, and then you might see this going down again for these post-tests. So you can see, like, here's a fatigue effect. The treatment actually did something because the slope is less. It's flat. It's less than these two. And then here's another fatigue effect. Okay. So now, counterbalancing. This is good for order effects, is what I'm missing there. Order effects are when you have a question before another, and the first question is going to impact the second question. Okay, so now it's time to talk about the broccoli question. The broccoli question is an order effect, and you need to counterbalance it. So what's going on here is usually in the online class that I teach, and sometimes in the in-person class, it's harder It's harder when we're not all there. It's easy when we're all there to do it there. But anyway, so some of you would go to a website and it says, or like a Google form, and it says, hey, how much do you like broccoli? And you answer like 1 to 10. Like, oh, I like broccoli quite a bit, like a 7. And then it asks you, how much do you like chocolate chip cookies? And then because you gave broccoli a 7, you're kind of pigeonholed to give chocolate chip cookies a 10. So the other half of you are given the cookie question first. So you might put an 8, and then it asks you about broccoli next, and you're like, oh, well, if cookies are an 8, then broccoli must be like a 4. And so if you look at the answers that come in, what you see is chocolate chip cookies are much higher in the group that got cookies second than the group that got cookies first. And so that's an order effect. And the way that you account for that is to counterbalance it by giving half the people one order and half the people the other. There's not a way, really, that you could get rid of this order effect. You could account for it by giving half of the people cookies first and half the people broccoli first. Then what you do is average the answers, and cookies are somewhere between 10 and 8, so like a 9, which is pretty close, and broccoli is somewhere between a 4 and a 7, so like a 5.5 or something like that. So, you know, the data is still pretty good. Okay, what about between versus within? Well, in a within subjects design, all of your participants go through all the measures. This broccoli question that we're just talking about, this is a within subjects design. Everybody answers for broccoli. Everybody answers for cookies. In a between subjects design, half of you would answer for broccoli only, the other half would answer for cookies only. Okay, motor disorders. This is the one in the other video. Don't pay attention to that motor disorders slide. I had a guest speaker for that one, and there was different information, basically. Not that, you know, one is true and the other isn't. It's just that she's talking about her research, and what we talked about in our class is kind of a more general, large picture approach to motor disorders. So what you need to know are, how are motor disorders different from aphasias? Well, aphasias are affecting word retrieval or word processing, right? Broca's aphasia is you can't get the word out. Wernicke's aphasia is you are just talking in word salad. Motor disorders, you can find the words easily, but you may have trouble actually getting the words out because of the motor problem. So Broca's aphasia has trouble getting the words out because they can't connect the concept of what they're saying to the actual word. So they can kind of visualize a picture of what they're trying to say, but they can't connect a word to that. And motor disorders, they can visualize the picture, they know the word they want to say, but the actual motor program or the muscles themselves are disordered and don't allow those phonemes to be produced correctly. What are the two main subtypes of motor disorders? Well, we have apraxia and we have dysarthria. Apraxia is something that affects the neural or spinal motor components. The programming is disordered, right? So like we were talking about multiple sclerosis or atrophic lateral sclerosis, these are all apraxias, because it's not the muscles that are the problem. The muscles can function fine. The muscle tone is fine. It's actually the programming in the brain and the spinal cord to the muscles where the issue lies. They're sending an incorrect signal, or the signal isn't able to make it from the brain to the muscles. That's apraxia. Dysarthria is muscular weakness or paralysis. The programming is fine. The actual brain is okay, but then it gets to the muscles and there's a problem actually making the muscles work. We talked really briefly in motor disorders about FOXP2. This is a gene that makes people with this FOXP2 deletion on the FOXP2 gene have kind of genetic dysarthria. It leads to a whole host of improper muscular movement. And it's specifically affects the muscles, so it's a dysarthria. Okay. AAC devices, there is quite a bit of this in the other slide too, but just to hit really quickly, communication is the essence of life, right? So it's essential, basically. Conventional is like language that a lot of people talk, or any gestures that a lot of people would know. Non-conventional is some sort of code that requires some sort of shared experience between the person communicating and the person they're communicating with. Think of that E-Tran board. You wouldn't be able to just take your E-Tran board on the subway and talk to somebody and be like, hey, can you, and you're looking at all these different things and you're expecting them to understand you. It's a non-conventional method of communication. Direct versus indirect access we talked about really quickly right at the end of AAC devices. Direct access is when you can directly access, that's obvious, I guess, what it is you're trying to do. Typing letters on a keyboard is direct access. Or if you're using eye gaze like Stephen Hawking, if he's typing something out, that's direct access. Indirect access is like we watched the person who just has one switch and they have to use that switch to narrow down which half of the keyboard they want to type from. That's indirect access. They can't just hit the S key. They have to go left half, right half, middle, and then they've pressed S. And then lastly, we've got dependent, supported, and independent. Somebody is considered dependent if they need active participation on the part of the conversational partner. An E-Tran board is going to require some active participation. A supported communication is if they're using those core boards or those the video that we watched with the kid who takes around the communication board and points at pictures. This is supported. They need a little bit of attention from their communication partner, but not as much. And then independent is going to be like, again, Stephen Hawking, who can create a message on his own and then deliver it like as a speech or over the phone or whatever. This is a continuum. So, I mean, I'm kind of giving it to you like 3 different levels. But if you actually go into this, to AAC devices and helping people use these, which you might, especially if you work in schools, it is not like, the set in stone, like there's 3 different chunk. That's not really how it is. There's a total continuum. And some people are more dependent than others. So it's hard to say which, tier they'd actually be in. So that's why we call it a continuum. Okay, cleft lip and palate. This is not in the other video, so we definitely need to talk about this. So cleft lip versus cleft palate. Well, cleft lip includes the lip tissue and also the incisive suture of the maxilla. Cleft palate is just going to run down the medial palatine suture, which is the middle of the roof of your mouth, up into the nasal passage. There's a hole into the nasal passage. You can have both. You can have cleft lip with palate involvement, and cleft lip and palate is what you would call that. And again, you can have bilateral or unilateral cleft lip, which unilateral means only one side, bilateral means both sides. VPI stands for velopharyngeal insufficiency. It's basically a muscular disorder of the velum. Sometimes people are born without these muscles, or they don't work correctly, and that is considered velopharyngeal insufficiency, or submucosal cleft palate. It's characterized by hypernasality. Hypernasality just means everything is nasalized because the velum can't close. There's no muscles in the velum; it can't close. So then all the air comes out of the velum. If you're trying to say ba ba ba, it'll come out as ma ma ma, even if you're not trying to say ma. You're trying to say ba. And that's because you can't achieve the closure that you need for those really high pressure consonants like ba and pa, ta, things like that. So there are surgeries for a lot of these. In non-developing countries, these are usually done at pretty early ages. Cleft lip is usually done around 3 months. Cleft palate is usually done around 9 months. Of course, this is like a guess. It's around these times, but it's when the child has enough body weight to be put under long enough to undergo the surgery. Cleft lip takes less time than cleft palate, and so cleft palate, you need to have more body weight for more anesthesia. VPI is usually diagnosed later, so the surgery or use of a speech bulb can happen pretty much when this is diagnosed. VPI usually isn't diagnosed until the child starts speaking, sometimes even a little bit later than that, depending on the severity. So it can be, surgically aided, or you can use a prosthesis like the speech bulb, pretty much when VPI is diagnosed. Okay, voice disorder is on the other group of slides. It's going to talk about an ah ratio in addition to an S to Z ratio. I didn't talk about the ah ratio in our class because it's pretty much the same thing as the S to Z ratio, so no reason to talk about both really. Some things that you're looking at in addition to the S to Z ratio when you're doing tests is the closure pattern of the vocal folds, also the color of the vocal folds, and the movement of the vocal folds. So they need to close together really, really well, really perfectly. They need to move, again, pretty well. They need to move sort of at the same rate. One can't be more stiff than the other because that's going to create some problems. If they are not closing all the way, that's going to allow air to escape and create a breathy or raspy voice. If they're closing too much, that can create kind of a creaky, harsh voice. So those are the kinds of things you're looking for. Color is going to tell you if there is a hemorrhage or some other form of tissue damage to the vocal folds. Okay. All right. So other than those things that we talked about in here, the information is the same between the two videos. So this video supersedes anything in that video. So the motor disorders stuff here, study that. Skip over motor disorders in the other video. The other video doesn't have cleft palate, so just use this. Everything else is pretty much the same. I've just further clarified some things here. So hopefully it'll just help you a little bit more. So, all right. Great. I'll see you on Monday, and we'll talk about ears. We'll talk about the physiology of hearing and sound waves. It's a pretty good lecture. I think you'll enjoy it. All right. See you later. Good luck on your exam.